What do you see as the role of domestic manufacturing in preventing future supply chain disruptions, especially in areas where the U.S. isn't competitive?
So I think the supply chain disruptions that took us by surprise demonstrate that we have no idea where the next supply chain crises are going to be. But it also proved another thing, that the manufacturers in this country who survived China and Amazon and Walmart are very agile and flexible. Nearly every manufacturer in this country that I'm aware of made some sort of attempt to solve the PPE crisis, even though many had zero experience in manufacturing ventilators and PPE. At Unionwear, we were given the task of manufacturing a face shield when I had never heard of a face shield before. We were sent a picture of a face shield by the Hospital Association of New York, and we identified the clear material in the front of it as the plastic that we use in the binders that we make, and the foam that's put up against the forehead as the foam in a backpack strap. And the headband that goes around your head is the headband we use in a baseball hat. So we were able to very quickly prototype a face shield, get it approved, and go into production in a couple of days. And I've heard thousands of stories like that over the next several months. So while there's a lot of talk about ensuring that our healthcare products are manufactured domestically, I think both the problem and the solution are bigger than that. I think the problem is that outsourcing has weakened domestic manufacturing to the point where several industries can just break. Yet, domestic manufacturing is absolutely critical to our security, to our economy, and to our country's survival. If you think about manufacturing's role during wartime, manufacturing is so important that the president can actually force us to do work at the discretion of the government. When there's another supply chain shortage because we outsource too much of our infrastructure and manufacturing to China or other places in the third world, domestic manufacturing will have to come to the rescue. If there's a problem with food supply or health or the weather or climate change, it's going to be the manufacturing sector of our economy that's going to have to play a major role. So we need to do everything in our power to shore up domestic manufacturing. Companies need to take into account the total cost of ownership of a product when they decide to make things domestically versus importing. Total cost of ownership is a calculator that's presented by the Reshoring Institute that helps companies figure out what the true cost of importing is. There are a lot of costs associated with importing that you don't have with domestic manufacturing, like the cost of travel and the cost of prototyping and the cost of even shipping samples is exorbitant, and the time frame and the lines of credit and the delays and the transportation problems and the pirating and all sorts of things like that. When those things are taken into account, often a lot of decisions to import look more expensive than domestic manufacturing. It's not always the case, but I believe there are a few more costs that companies need to take into consideration when they're looking at importing. One is, what is the cost to the entire economy of your company's decision to import? Take a look at the absence of PPE at the beginning of the crisis. We lost tens of thousands of lives because we didn't have ventilators and PPE because all of those things were outsourced overseas and we didn't have a federal stockpile. That companies' decisions to import those products created a tremendous burden on our country. What about the cost to your company's reputation of importing? We've seen this at Unionwear. We've seen a surge in interest in our baseball hats from companies that used to put their logo on baseball hats that said made in China. Same with bags and laptop bags. Companies do not want to be associated with importing right now. And that is something that companies need to take into account. So I think that companies do need to have domestic suppliers. I think companies should look for a second source of supply if they're importing, and not just have a second source of supply. Feed that source of supply. It's no good to have a supplier if you don't give them enough business and they're not able to stick around. We're seeing in the textile business right now a surprising number of factories dropping out. And I thought at the beginning of the crisis, the textile business was going to be strong because of the tremendous interest in masks. But it wasn't enough to keep a lot of companies around. What's happened is a lot of big retail bankruptcies like J. Crew and Brooks Brothers and Men's Warehouse have caused domestic factories to close, and that were supporting a lot of these businesses. So while demand in domestic masks, for example, and domestic goods have increased, the supply has contracted. And when that increase goes away, and it does wax and wane, we're going to see other companies disappear. And the next time we need the textile business, there are not going to be as many companies here. So I think businesses in general, particular manufacturers, should look to increase their number of domestic suppliers. And our politicians and government agencies should build regulations and incentives that incentivize domestic manufacturing.